Usually when I say yes to sharing my reflection, I look first at the dates I'm available, and only later do I look at the readings. And the Spirit seems to point out where I'm to go with all of them. But as I began to actually prepare for today, I had a lot of doubts. The Gospel again this week is very short, and we hear Jesus saying, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him." And when I first read that, I thought, what am I supposed to do with this? Today we're here together in the time of God's glory. On the cross, Jesus showed us glory, not in coming down from the cross in a magnificent news-making spectacle, but rather in a spectacular act of heart, of immense love, as he forgives those who are killing him. Divine glory is manifested in his forgiveness of the actions of others towards him, towards those who killed him. This is the real glory, the compassion and forgiveness that Jesus manifested in the face of hatred, jealousy, and murder. And the gospel continues. Love one another. As I've loved you, so you also should love one another. And we see this in many different faces today. We see it in the faces of those who have stayed behind in the Ukraine to serve their country, their brothers and their sisters. I see it in the face of Father Pavlo Viscosti, OMI, and others who remained in Kyiv to serve those who could not leave. We see it in the faces of so many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples who are inviting us to walk with them, to be in community with them. It's not about fixing something, or assigning blame, or even having to be better than the other. As I have loved you, so should you also love one another. Compassion and forgiveness. I ask myself softly, what does it look like in my own very small and ordinary life? Am I capable of loving those people who have hurt me, some who hurt me a lot? Am I incapable of forgiving them? So a little story. There once was this man, a priest, who would shout down to us little children about how bad we were and how much we hurt God as we sat in church every Sunday. And he would stare at each of us in turn and ask, how can God love you when you're so bad? And I remember sitting there and just crying. Later as a teenager, I left the church because God would surely never love anyone like me. I was already deep into drugs and alcohol, and my life got steadily darker and more hopeless. I remember hearing along the way that my first communion priest had been made a bishop, and I wondered how they could promote a man like that. Years later, when I returned to the church, I was asked to give a talk to a group of seminarians. I know, hard to imagine, talking to seminarians. But I was invited to the seminary to talk to future priests about welcoming single lay people back into the church. Just as I began to speak, the Archbishop walked in, and he sat right down in the front row, right in front of me. And he did not look happy. At the end of my talk, he stood up and said how sad he was that I had shamed my church and my family. I, who had been sent to a Catholic school. I, who had gotten into drugs and alcohol and a lot of other things. He suggested I leave. And I was filled with rage and became boldened enough to tell him that I had been invited and maybe he should leave. And he did, or at least he left the room. I carried that anger and fear and hatred for more than 40 years. And it was only during this past Lent, when I started to tell somebody about him, that I realized what I was carrying around inside of me. and it was only harming me because he had died many years ago. I told God I needed to let him go, and I asked God to help me. This past week, I was looking online at some pictures of some beloved oblates from out west, many of them now dead, but it was such a gift to be able to see their faces again. And then, oops, there he was in a picture with some of them, and he was smiling. Curiously, I did not quickly shut down my computer and try to bring up memories of how horrible he was. Instead, I simply looked at him calmly, and I noticed that he was smiling. I told him that he looked happy there, and then I moved on to the next screen of photos, and I smiled. Finally, I was free of that fear and hurt. No longer could it rule my life. Compassion and forgiveness. Pope Francis tells us that love opens up toward the other, becoming the foundation of human relationships. In Acts today, we heard about how the door to faith was open to the Gentiles, to all of us. And it was in Revelations that we heard, "See, I make all things new." Compassion and forgiveness. Truly, we are all made new.